The red warning light flashed across the massive space station that served as the home of the Galactic Council. Inside the main hall, alien beings from 12 different worlds sat around a circular table, their faces showing fear and worry. The emergency signal they had just received was unlike anything they had seen before. Ambassador HFY, a tall blue creature with multiple arms like an octopus, stared at the glowing screen in front of her. Her hands shook as she read the message again and again. The words were simple but terrifying. The peaceful farming world of Vidania Prime was under attack by creatures so deadly that entire armies had been wiped out trying to stop them. The message played again through the speakers in the Great Hall. Static filled the air, then a desperate voice broke through. "This is Vidania Prime calling anyone who can hear us. The Vorthak swarm has broken through our shields. Our cities are burning. Our people are hiding in caves and bunkers underground. These monsters are eating everything. They are getting closer to where our families are hiding. We have maybe 2 days before they find everyone. Please, if anyone can hear this, help us." The transmission ended with a crackling sound, leaving the council chamber in complete silence. Council Speaker Veltar, who looked like he was made of living crystal, stood up slowly. His body flickered with different colors as he spoke, which happened when his people were very upset. "This is the 4th world this month," Veltar said, his voice echoing in the large room. "The Vorthak swarm is spreading faster than we thought possible. Remember what happened to the Altarian rescue fleet? 300 ships, all destroyed in less than an hour. The creatures ate right through their hulls like they were paper." Council member Thixul, who had green scales covering his reptile-like body, slammed his clawed hand on the table. "What about the Centauri Defense Force? They had the best weapons in the galaxy. The swarm turned their own ships into feeding grounds. And the Draknari warriors, the bravest fighters we know, they lasted exactly 12 minutes against these things." The other council members shifted nervously in their seats. Some had fur, others had feathers, and a few looked like walking plants. But they all shared the same expression of fear. They had run out of options, and everyone in the room knew it. The Vorthak swarm was not natural. Someone had created these creatures in a laboratory, making them perfect killing machines. They were as big as buildings, with teeth like swords and claws that could cut through the strongest metals. Worse yet, they were smart. They hunted in groups, set traps, and learned from every battle. Each world they destroyed made them stronger and more dangerous. HFY cleared her throat, making a sound like water bubbling. "There might be one more possibility," she said quietly. "One group we have not asked for help." "Speak up," Veltar commanded, his crystal body turning a bright yellow color. "The humans," she whispered. The reaction was immediate and violent. Half the council members jumped up from their seats. Thixul hissed like an angry snake. Representative Mordun, who looked like a walking tree with eyes, stepped back as if someone had suggested releasing a dangerous animal into the room. "Are you insane?" Thixul shouted. "The humans are killers. They have spent their entire history fighting wars against each other. Their planet is covered with the ruins of civilizations they destroyed. They make weapons for fun and call it entertainment when they watch others fight." Mordun's wooden face twisted with disgust. "We quarantined them to their own section of space for good reasons. Every report we have about them talks about violence, conquest, and destruction. They cannot solve problems without fighting. They are almost as dangerous as the swarm itself." Other council members nodded in agreement. They had all heard the stories about humanity. How humans had covered their own world with weapons that could destroy entire continents. How they had fought countless wars over resources, land, and ideas. How their entertainment included watching gladiators fight to the death and creating stories about battles and conquest. But HFY had done her research. Her datapad showed the terrible truth about their situation. "Look at the numbers," she said, making the information appear on the main screen for everyone to see. "Vidania Prime has 12 million people hiding in underground bunkers. The swarm is digging toward them right now. Our best calculations show they will break through the bunker walls in exactly 48 hours. The room fell silent again as everyone stared at the countdown timer on the screen. 4 to 7 hours and 36 minutes until 12 million innocent people would be eaten alive by monsters. "We have sent our strongest fleets," HFY continued. "We have used our best weapons and our bravest warriors. Nothing has worked. The swarm gets stronger with every battle. We are running out of time and running out of options." She stood up and looked around the room at each council member. "I know what humans are. I know their history of violence and war. But right now, millions of people are going to die if we do nothing. Maybe the humans will make things worse. maybe they will cause more problems. But doing nothing guarantees that everyone on Vidania Prime will be dead in 2 days. The debate that followed was heated and long. Some council members argued that humans were too dangerous to trust. Others worried that humanity would demand payment or territory in exchange for help. A few suggested that humans might join forces with the swarm instead of fighting it. But as the hours passed and the countdown timer kept moving, fear of extinction slowly overcame fear of humanity. The final vote was close, 7 council members against and 5 in favor. But in the Galactic Council, majority rule decided everything. With shaking hands, Kethera typed the message that would be sent to Earth. It was simple and desperate. Galactic Council to human authorities. We need help. Vidania Prime under attack by hostile alien force. 12 million lives at risk. All other rescue attempts failed. Will you assist? She hesitated for a moment before pressing the send button. Once this message was transmitted, there would be no taking it back. They were about to ask the galaxy's most feared species to save the day. The message shot across space at faster-than-light speed, heading toward the small blue planet that everyone considered the home of dangerous killers. Now all they could do was wait and hope that humanity would prove to be the right kind of monsters for the job. The alarm bells rang through Lunar Base, the massive military station orbiting Earth's moon. Inside the main command center, Admiral Jake Harrison stood before a huge 3-dimensional map that showed Vidania Prime floating in space. The planet looked sick, covered with thousands of red dots that moved like crawling insects across its surface. Each dot represented one of the Vorthak creatures, and each creature was as big as a city block. Admiral Harrison was a tall man with gray hair and scars on his hands from battles fought long ago. He had spent 30 years defending Earth and human colonies from pirates, hostile aliens, and natural disasters. But he had never seen anything like what was happening on Vidania Prime. Captain Lisa Rodriguez walked quickly across the command center floor, her boots clicking against the metal surface. She held a data pad in her hands and looked both excited and confused. "Sir, we just received a response from the Galactic Council about our mobilization orders. They say they are shocked by how fast we responded to their distress call." Admiral Harrison turned away from the holographic display and looked at his captain. A small smile appeared on his weathered face, but it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile soldiers get when they find something ironic and bitter at the same time. "I bet they are shocked," he said, shaking his head. "For years they have been calling us dangerous killers and keeping us locked away in our own corner of space. Now they send us a desperate message asking for help, and they are surprised when the killers actually show up ready to fight." Lieutenant Tony Chen looked up from his computer station where green numbers and symbols were constantly changing on multiple screens. His job was to track fleet movements, weapon systems, and supply logistics for the entire human space navy. "What are your orders, Admiral? How big of a response do you want?" Admiral Harrison walked over to the main tactical display and pointed at different sections of human-controlled space. "Full mobilization. I want the 3rd Fleet, that's our heavy battleships and carriers. Get me the 9th Marine Division, those are our best ground fighters. And contact Special Operations Command, tell Colonel Rita Brooks to get her people ready for the nastiest ground combat mission they have ever seen." The command center suddenly became very busy. Officers started talking rapidly into their headsets, coordinating with bases across the solar system. Computer screens lit up with ship schedules, supply lists, and troop movements. The entire human military machine was waking up and preparing for war. Captain Rodriguez looked at her datapad again and seemed worried about something. "Sir, there is one thing. The Galactic Council has not offered us any payment for this mission. No money, no territory, no trade agreements, nothing. They just asked for help and that was it." Admiral Harrison walked over to the large window that looked out into space. From Lunar Base, Earth looked like a beautiful blue marble with white clouds swirling around it. It was home to 8 billion people who had spent centuries learning how to survive in a hostile universe. He put his hand against the cool glass and thought about what Captain Rodriguez had just told him. "Captain," he said without turning around, "let me tell you something about payment. Down there on Vidania Prime, there are 12 million people hiding in underground bunkers. Mothers holding their children, trying to keep them quiet so the monsters will not hear them. Fathers standing guard at sealed doors, knowing they probably will not survive but hoping their families might. Teachers trying to keep their students calm while they listen to terrible sounds coming from above ground." He turned back to face his officers, and they could see something burning in his eyes that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with determination. "Those people are scared and alone and waiting to die. They do not have money to pay us. They do not have territory to give us. All they have is hope that someone, somewhere, gives a damn about their lives. Captain, that is the only payment I have ever needed. Within 6 hours of receiving the distress call, the human fleet was ready to launch. 4 to 7 ships of various sizes and types gathered in formation near Lunar Base. There were massive battleships with enough firepower to crack a moon in half. Fast attack cruisers designed to hunt down enemy vessels. Transport ships packed with Marines and their equipment. Hospital ships ready to treat wounded soldiers and civilians. Engineering vessels loaded with repair equipment and construction materials. The fleet looked impressive and deadly, but Admiral Harrison knew they were heading toward an enemy unlike anything they had faced before. The Vorthak swarm had already destroyed 3 major alien fleets, each one more advanced than anything humanity possessed. But humans had something those other species might have lacked, something that came from growing up on a planet where everything seemed designed to kill them. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, communication channels throughout the galaxy buzzed with alien conversations. Other species were talking about humanity's response, and most of what they said was not positive. "The humans are moving too quickly," said a Centauri diplomat to his colleagues. "They did not take time for proper planning or negotiation. This is exactly the kind of reckless behavior we expect from them." An Altarian military commander spoke to his staff with obvious concern. "I told you we should not have contacted them. Humans cannot solve problems without violence. They will probably make this whole situation worse than it already is." A Draknari leader, whose own warriors had been completely destroyed by the swarm, had his own opinions. "Should we warn the survivors on Vidania Prime that their rescuers might be more dangerous than the creatures that are hunting them? At least the swarm only wants to eat them. Humans might do much worse." Back on Lunar Base, Admiral Harrison stood in his private office, reading reports from advanced scout ships that had been watching Vidania Prime for the past few hours. The information was not good. The Vorthak creatures were larger and more intelligent than anyone had realized. They hunted in coordinated groups, used tactics and strategy, and seemed to learn from every encounter with their enemies. But Admiral Harrison was not discouraged by this news. Throughout human history, whenever people faced impossible odds against terrible enemies, they had found ways to survive and win. Sometimes through superior technology, sometimes through better tactics, but most often through simple determination to protect the things they loved. He closed the reports and looked out his window one more time at Earth, hanging peaceful and blue in the darkness of space. Tomorrow, 4 to 7 human ships would arrive at Vidania Prime and discover whether humanity's reputation as killers would be enough to stop creatures that had been designed to be perfect killers themselves. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying humanity's finest warriors toward a world they had never seen, to save people who feared them almost as much as they feared the monsters trying to eat them. It was going to be an interesting day. The human fleet suddenly appeared at the edge of the Vidania star system like ghosts materializing out of thin air. One moment there was empty space, and the next moment 4 to 7 human warships hung in formation, their metal hulls gleaming under the light of the distant sun. The journey through hyperspace had taken 18 hours, but for the crew members, it felt like they had been traveling forever. Aboard the marine transport ship called Thunder Bay, Sergeant Bobby Martinez pressed his face against the small window in the troop compartment. What he saw made his stomach turn cold with shock. Vidania Prime had once been known throughout the galaxy as a beautiful farming world, covered with green fields and crystal-clear rivers. The planet was supposed to look like an emerald jewel floating in space, with white clouds drifting peacefully across continents filled with crops and small cities. Instead, the planet looked like it was dying. The surface was brown and gray, with huge scars cutting across continents where something had torn up the ground. Worst of all, the planet seemed to be moving. Dark shapes the size of mountains crawled across the surface like gigantic insects, leaving trails of destruction behind them. "Mother of God," Sergeant Martinez whispered, his breath fogging up the window. "Those things are absolutely massive." Private Tommy Williams squeezed in beside him to get a better look. "Sarge, how big are we talking here? Like elephant big or building big?" Martinez stared at the moving shapes and tried to estimate their size compared to the cities he could barely see on the planet's surface. "Son, I think we are looking at creatures the size of city blocks. Maybe bigger." The news spread quickly through the transport ship. Marines who had fought pirates and hostile aliens in a dozen different star systems suddenly felt very small and vulnerable. They had trained for combat against enemies their own size, not against monsters that could step on a tank without noticing it. On the flagship called Freedom, Admiral Jake Harrison stood in the main command center with his senior officers, studying a three-dimensional map of Vidania Prime that showed every detail of the planet's surface. The map was covered with red dots that moved in slow but organized patterns across the continents. Each red dot represented one Vorthak creature, and there were thousands of them. Colonel Rita Brooks, the commanding officer of the Special Operations Division, pointed at several clusters of red dots with a laser pointer. Her job was to analyze enemy movements and find their weaknesses. She had been studying the Vorthak creatures for the entire 18-hour journey, and what she had discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. "Admiral, these creatures are not just randomly destroying everything they find," she said, highlighting different areas of the map. "Look at these movement patterns. They are organized. They are working together like a military unit. They are systematically hunting for the people hiding underground." Captain Lisa Rodriguez pulled up a different type of scan that showed what the creatures looked like from the inside. The biological readings made her shake her head in disbelief. "Sir, these things have sensory organs that we have never seen before. They can hear heartbeats through solid rock. They can smell human breath from 50 meters away. They can detect body heat through underground bunkers that should be completely sealed." Lieutenant Tony Chen was running calculations on his computer, and the numbers he was seeing made him very nervous. "Admiral, based on their current digging speed and the depth of the main refugee bunker complex, they will break through the protective barriers in 36 hours. Maybe less if they work together." Admiral Harrison stared at the countdown timer that appeared on the main screen. 35 hours and 42 minutes until 12 million innocent people would be exposed to creatures designed to kill everything they encountered. The weight of all those lives pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. "Colonel Brooks, give me your honest assessment," he said. "What are our chances of stopping these things before they reach the civilians?" Rita studied the enemy formations on the holographic display, her mind already working through different attack strategies. She had commanded ground operations on hostile worlds for 15 years, but she had never faced anything like the Vorthak swarm. Still, humans had always found ways to kill things that seemed impossible to kill. "Conventional orbital bombardment will not work," she said, pointing at areas where the creatures were located directly above refugee bunkers. "If we blast them from space, the explosions will collapse the underground shelters and kill everyone we are trying to save. We will need surgical precision strikes and ground operations." Captain Rodriguez looked uncomfortable as she delivered the next piece of information. "Sir, we are receiving communications from Galactic Council observers who are monitoring this operation. They are requesting that we avoid using excessive force during our rescue mission." Admiral Harrison turned to stare at his captain with an expression of complete disbelief. For a moment, the command center was so quiet that everyone could hear the humming of the ship's engines and the beeping of electronic equipment. Then the admiral started laughing, but it was not a happy sound. It was the cold, bitter laughter of a man who had heard something so ridiculous that he could not believe anyone had actually said it out loud. "Let me understand this correctly, Captain," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The same Galactic Council that spent decades calling us dangerous killers and keeping us quarantined in our own section of space is now asking us to be gentle with creatures that are literally designed to eat entire civilizations." He turned back to Colonel Brooks, and everyone in the command center could see the fire burning in his eyes. "Colonel, forget what the Council observers want. I have a different question for you. What is the most excessive amount of force you can apply to these creatures while still keeping those 12 million refugees alive?" Rita Brooks had served under Admiral Harrison for 8 years, and she knew that look in his eyes. It was the expression he got when someone had threatened innocent people and he was about to remind the universe why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species. A slow smile spread across her face as she studied the tactical display, and for a moment every alien observer monitoring the communication channels understood exactly why their governments had been so afraid of humanity. "Oh sir," she said, her voice filled with the kind of confidence that comes from commanding the best-trained soldiers in known space, "I think we can manage something that will be very appropriately excessive." The human fleet moved into attack formation, and 4 to 7 ships full of warriors who had been called killers prepared to show the galaxy what humans did to monsters who threatened children. The first wave of human dropships screamed through Vidania's atmosphere like meteors falling from heaven. Their heat shields glowed bright orange and red as they cut through the thick air, leaving trails of fire across the dark sky. From deep underground bunkers, millions of terrified refugees pressed their faces against small periscope screens, watching as the ships they had been told belonged to the galaxy's most dangerous killers prepared to land on their ruined world. The refugees were called Zephyrians, and they looked somewhat like humans except their skin had a slight blue tint and they were generally taller and thinner. For generations, they had heard stories about humanity from the Galactic Council. They had been told that humans were violent creatures who solved every problem with weapons and war. They had been warned that humans were almost as dangerous as the monsters that were now hunting them. As the dropships touched down on the scarred surface of their planet, the Zephyrians expected to see exactly what the Council had described. They expected to see mindless warriors who would charge into battle without caring about innocent lives. They expected destruction and chaos. What they saw instead changed everything they thought they knew about humanity. Sergeant Kelly Washington jumped out of her dropship and immediately found herself standing in what could only be described as a nightmare landscape. The ground beneath her boots was no longer the rich soil that had once grown food for millions of people. Instead, it was a twisted mess of melted rock, acidic pools, and strange organic material that the Vorthak creatures had left behind as they consumed everything in their path. The air smelled like burning chemicals mixed with rotting meat. In the distance, she could see the massive shapes of Vorthak bioforms moving slowly across the horizon like living mountains. Some were digging into the ground with claws the size of subway cars. Others were simply standing guard, their multiple eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Sergeant Washington's mission was simple in concept but incredibly dangerous in practice. Her squad had been assigned to reach a collapsed apartment building where underground sensors had detected 43 Zephyrian life signs. These were civilians who had been trapped when their building fell down during the initial swarm attack. They were alive, but they would not stay that way much longer if nobody helped them. "Contact, 2 o'clock high," called out Corporal Danny Rodriguez, pointing toward a creature that was climbing over the ruins of what had once been a shopping mall. The Vorthak bioform was 12 meters tall, roughly the size of a 4-story building. Its body was covered with natural armor that looked like black metal plates. It had 6 legs that ended in razor-sharp claws, and its head featured multiple eyes and a mouth full of teeth designed for tearing through steel and concrete. Right now, it was systematically destroying the collapsed apartment building, trying to dig down to where the survivors were hiding. Sergeant Washington and her squad moved like a precision machine. They had trained for this exact type of urban combat for years, practicing in mock cities and abandoned buildings until every movement became automatic. Corporal Rodriguez threw flashbang grenades that exploded in brilliant white light, temporarily blinding the creature and disrupting its enhanced sensory organs. At the same time, Private Tommy Chen and Private Rebecca Martinez opened fire with armor-piercing rounds, aiming for the weak points in the creature's bioarmor that human scientists had identified by studying the wreckage of previous battles. The fight lasted exactly 90 seconds. When it was over, the Vorthak creature lay dead in the rubble, its massive body twitching as its nervous system finally shut down. Any other military force in the galaxy would have stopped at this point to celebrate their victory and plan their next move. The humans did not celebrate. They did not even pause. "Rodriguez, Chen, get those concrete beams stabilized before the whole structure comes down," Sergeant Washington ordered, pointing at the damaged building. "Martinez, set up the medical station in that protected area over there. We have people trapped underneath all this mess, and we are going to get them out." For the next 6 hours, the same soldiers who had just killed a bioengineered nightmare worked with equal skill and determination to save lives. When their power tools made too much noise and might attract more swarm creatures, they dug through rubble and twisted metal with their bare hands until their fingers bled. When they found injured Zephyrians, they shared their medical supplies, their water, and even their emergency food rations with families they had never met before. Private Martinez, who was trained as a combat medic, spent 4 hours performing surgery on a Zephyrian child who had been crushed by falling debris. She worked by flashlight in a makeshift operating room, using her own medical kit and supplies that were supposed to last her entire squad for a week. When other soldiers asked if she needed help, she just told them to keep digging for more survivors. Above ground, Captain Janet Adams was coordinating similar rescue operations across the entire planet. Her pilots were flying transport helicopters and medical evacuation ships through aerial obstacle courses made of giant alien monsters. They threaded their aircraft between Vorthak bioforms that could swat them out of the sky with a single swipe, all to reach isolated groups of survivors who had been trapped for days without food or water. One pilot, Lieutenant Mike Torres, made 7 trips in 4 hours to evacuate wounded civilians from a collapsed hospital. Each time he took off, Vorthak creatures tried to bring down his aircraft with acidic projectiles and razor-sharp appendages. Each time he landed, more human soldiers rushed forward to help load wounded Zephyrians onto his ship, even though they knew the creatures were getting closer with every minute. The alien observers watching from orbit had expected to see exactly what the Galactic Council had warned them about. They had expected mindless violence and reckless destruction. Instead, they witnessed something that made them question everything they thought they knew about humanity. These were not mindless killers. These were guardians. Every act of violence was carefully calculated to protect innocent life. Every tactical decision put civilian safety above military efficiency. When human soldiers had to choose between completing their mission quickly or taking extra time to save one more family, they chose to save the family every single time. In the deepest underground bunker complex, Elder Kato Yamamoto watched everything through communication screens that showed what was happening on the surface. He was the leader of the largest group of Zephyrian survivors, and for days he had been preparing his people for the worst possible outcome. When the Galactic Council had told them that human ships were coming, many refugees had wondered if they should be more afraid of their rescuers than of the monsters hunting them. Elder Yamamoto had tried to calm their fears, but privately he had shared their concerns. Now he watched as human medics treated injured Zephyrian children with the same gentle care and attention they gave to their own wounded soldiers. He saw Sergeant Washington carrying a wounded Zephyrian teenager to safety while her squad provided covering fire against approaching bioforms, risking their own lives to protect someone they had never met before. "I do not understand," he whispered to his assistant, an older Zephyrian woman named Elder Suki Tanaka. "The Galactic Council told us that humans were monsters. They said humanity was driven by violence and conquest. They said we should fear them almost as much as we fear the swarm." On the screen in front of them, they watched a human soldier give his last bottle of clean water to a dehydrated Zephyrian child, then go back to digging through rubble to look for more survivors even though he had not eaten or slept in 24 hours. Elder Tanaka looked at her leader with tears in her eyes. Perhaps, Elder Yamamoto, the council was afraid of the wrong thing. Perhaps they were not afraid that humans would destroy us. Perhaps they were afraid that humans would show the rest of the galaxy what real courage looks like. 72 hours after the human fleet had arrived at Vidania Prime, something happened that nobody in the galaxy thought was possible. The last Vorthak bioform on the planet died with a final, terrible scream that echoed across the scarred landscape. For the first time in weeks, the surface of Vidania Prime was completely quiet except for the sound of human rescue vehicles moving back and forth, carrying the last groups of survivors to safety. The planet looked like it had been through a war, which it had. The beautiful green fields and crystal rivers were gone, replaced by brown scars and twisted metal where cities used to stand. But it was free. Every single surviving Zephyrian civilian, all 8.7 million of them, had been evacuated to temporary shelters aboard human hospital ships or transported to other worlds where they could start rebuilding their lives. In the medical bay of the massive hospital ship called Hope, Dr. Carl Williams was finishing his treatment of the last wounded refugee. He had been working for 3 straight days without sleep, running on nothing but coffee, determination, and the knowledge that people were counting on him to save their lives. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion, but they were still steady enough to carefully bandage the arm of a young Zephyrian girl who had been trapped under rubble for 4 days. "There you go, sweetheart," he said gently, his voice hoarse from fatigue. "That should heal up just fine. And guess what? We found your parents. They are on their way here right now to see you." The little girl looked up at him with large, bright eyes and said something in her own language that he did not understand. But when she smiled and hugged his arm, he knew exactly what she meant. Dr. Williams had to turn away for a moment to wipe his eyes before anyone saw the tears. Meanwhile, on the flagship Freedom, Admiral Jake Harrison stood in the main communications center, staring at a large screen that showed the faces of the 12 most important leaders in the Galactic Council. These were the same beings who had called humanity killers and monsters. These were the same representatives who had quarantined humans to their own section of space because they were too dangerous to be trusted. Now, all 12 of them looked extremely uncomfortable. Some stared at their hands. Others shifted nervously in their seats. A few seemed unable to make eye contact with the Admiral at all. The fear they had once shown when talking about humanity was gone, replaced by something much more complex and difficult to deal with: shame. Council Speaker Veltar, the crystal being whose body usually glowed with confidence, now flickered with uncertain colors as he spoke. "Admiral Harrison, the Galactic Council wishes to express its deepest gratitude for your assistance in this crisis. We understand that our previous relationship with humanity has been complicated. To make up for this, we are prepared to offer substantial compensation for your services." Admiral Harrison's expression did not change at all. He simply looked at the council leaders with the same calm, steady gaze he had worn throughout the entire rescue operation. "Not interested," he said flatly. Speaker Veltar seemed surprised by this response. "Perhaps we could offer territorial concessions instead? New worlds for human colonization? Mining rights to valuable asteroids? Advanced technology exchanges that would benefit your civilization for centuries to come?" "No thank you," the Admiral replied, his voice showing no emotion whatsoever. The silence that followed was so uncomfortable that several council members started fidgeting with their communication equipment. They had expected the humans to demand payment, territory, or political favors in exchange for their help. They had prepared for negotiations and bargaining. They had not prepared for humans who simply did not want anything from them. Finally, Ambassador Kethare, the tentacled being who had first suggested asking humans for help, leaned forward and asked the question that everyone was thinking. Admiral Harrison, what do you want from us? The Admiral turned away from the communication screen and walked over to the large window that looked out into space. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see dozens of Zephyrian refugee ships slowly moving away from Vidania Prime, carrying survivors to temporary colonies where they could start over. Each ship was escorted by human vessels to make sure they arrived safely at their destinations. I want those people to find new homes where they can be safe, he said, still looking out the window. I want them to have medical care and education for their children. I want them to have the chance to rebuild their civilization and create something beautiful again. Most importantly, I want them to know that when they were alone and scared and facing certain death, someone in this galaxy actually gave a damn about their lives. He turned back to face the council, and for the first time since the conversation began, there was real emotion in his voice. That is all humanity has ever wanted from the rest of you. We wanted to know that we mattered. We wanted to know that when the monsters come crawling out of the dark corners of the universe, someone would be willing to stand up and fight them. We wanted to belong to something bigger than ourselves. At that moment, Colonel Rita Brooks entered the communications center. Her combat armor was still scorched and dented from 3 days of fighting bioengineered nightmares on the surface of Vidania Prime. In her hands, she carried a datapad with information that the Admiral had been waiting for. Sir, I have the final casualty reports, she said, her voice tired but professional. We lost 18 good people down there. Marines, medics, pilots, and engineers who gave their lives to save civilians they had never met before. Admiral Harrison nodded gravely, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. Every soldier who died under his command was a personal responsibility that he would carry for the rest of his life. What about their families, Colonel? Full military honors, full benefits for their surviving relatives, and I will personally deliver the death notifications to each family, she replied. It is the least I can do for people who died being heroes. Ambassador Kethare watched this exchange between the human officers with growing understanding. Slowly, pieces of a puzzle that had confused her for years began falling into place. Admiral Harrison, you do not see yourselves as killers at all, do you? The Admiral looked at her for a long moment before answering. When he spoke, his words were careful and thoughtful. We are exactly what you called us. We are killers. But we are the kind of killers who show up when innocent people are in trouble. We are the kind of killers who die before we let children get eaten by monsters. We are the kind of killers who fight other killers so that peaceful people can sleep safely at night. He gestured toward the tactical display that showed the now clean surface of Vidania Prime, with human ships still patrolling to make sure no Vorthak creatures had survived. The galaxy is full of predators and prey. You have been prey for so long that you forgot there was a third option available. Which is? Kethare asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. Guardians. Protectors. Sheepdogs who hunt the wolves so the sheep can graze in peace, Admiral Harrison replied. The universe will always have monsters in it. The question is whether civilized people are willing to become the right kind of monsters to stop them. The formal vote by the Galactic Council was unanimous. For the first time in human history, humanity was officially invited to join the Galactic Alliance, not as dangerous outcasts who needed to be contained, but as the protectors that the galaxy desperately needed. As the human fleet prepared to return to Earth, Admiral Harrison received one final transmission. It came from Elder Kato Yamamoto, the leader of the Zephyrian survivors. Admiral, the old alien said, his voice filled with gratitude and respect, thank you. Not just for saving our lives, but for showing us what real courage looks like. We will never forget what you did for us. Admiral Harrison smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn in days. Elder, it was our honor to help. And remember this, you are never alone in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the galaxy's killers are standing watch, ready to fight the monsters so you do not have to. The human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a saved world and a galaxy that finally understood the difference between monsters and the warriors who hunt them retry.